And we deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. We look at work from Dr. David Imhotep, but we also talk about the 1619 Project. Now, today is August 20th, 2019, the 403rd or 404th anniversary, I should say, of August 20th, 1619. Today is the 404th anniversary of that, when the White Lion pirate ship, as well as the treasurer, come into Virginia. And it was really Hampton, Virginia, as opposed to Jamestown, like people think. It comes into Point Comfort, and 20 and odd Africans are exchanged for food and water. At this point in time, codified slave laws don't exist in any of the 13 colonies. The first of the 13 colonies to have codified slave laws was Massachusetts in 1641. They come to Virginia right about 1661 or so. Okay. And they don't hit all these colonies at the same time. These first 20 and odd Africans are put into a form of indentured servitude. They're going to be released after about 3 to 5 years. To understand how, now this is an important article here that everybody should read, is called Much of What We've Been Told About Virginia's 1619 Africans is Wrong. Much of what we've been told about Virginia's 1619 Africans is wrong. And also, one of the books we use in the class is Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr. In chapter 2 of this book, he lays out how a lot of this stuff evolved here in this country. Okay. The colonies weren't originally designed to have slavery. If they were, they would have had slavery when it was originally set up, because England originally got involved in the transatlantic slave trade in 1562. Okay. But what happens is that when you look at chattel slavery evolving, that's going to largely be after 1675 and 1676 and what's known as Bacon's Rebellion. And Bacon's Rebellion is going to be after 1675, 1676, right about 1680, 1681, where the term white becomes widely used in the colonies to denote those of European ancestry. And what they were trying to do is break up the alliance between enslaved Africans, what we would call African Americans, or enslaved Africans, African indentured or free African people, poor whites, white indentured servants, poor whites, etc. There was an alliance between these different groups because they were all being oppressed on the tobacco plantations in Virginia, and they were being oppressed by the ruling elite. And they realized that they had a common enemy. So there was a rebellion that was led by a Virginia tobacco plantation owner named Nathaniel Bacon in 1675 in the colony of Virginia. And in 1670, it was about 500. There's about 500 rebels. Okay. In 1676, these rebels burned down the town of Jamestown, Virginia. Okay, how many people knew this? In 1676, they burned down the town of Jamestown, Virginia, and I was speaking on I was speaking at the Midwest Decarbonization Conference in November 2022, and I was on a panel discussion with Native Americans and African Americans, and we were talking about a shared experience, but we were also dealing with the fight for reparations for African Americans and the fight to get Native American treaties enforced. And, you know, one of the problems is that when we to really understand reparations and repairing the damage of a legacy of Jim Crow segregation, slavery, redlining, housing discrimination, things like this, you have to understand the laws and policies that were put in place that brought you to where you are, that continue to inflict the harm. Okay. Reparations, the root concept is to repair damage that was done. We first have to analyze the damage that was done to African people, the laws and policies put in place. And as I say, as a historian of 31 years, as a student of Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Professor James Small, Professor Kaba Hiawatha Kamene, we also have to analyze who African people were and what African people had before we were put into an institution of slavery, to understand the damage that was done, to understand that what has to actually be repaired. Just thinking giving cash payments is repairing the damage of a legacy of slavery. No, it's not. Because if everybody watching this broadcast wants to be honest, we know damn well if we all got $1 million today, white people will have it all back by this time next week. And all the laws and policies that have maldistributed wealth, power, and resources will continue to be in place that continue to inflict the harm. So cash payments can be part of a comprehensive repairing the damage of a legacy of slavery and Jim Crow segregation, etc. It can be part of comprehensive reparations, but it cannot only be the form of reparations, because once you spend the money, you have not changed the laws and policies that continue to inflict the harm. So to understand some of this history, what I did was during the panel discussion, I broke down briefly Bacon's Rebellion. And so many people, regardless of race, don't understand this history. Okay, so Bacon's Rebellion was triggered when a grant for Native American lands was denied. And there's a piece at blackpast.org that talks about Bacon's Rebellion, but also King Philip's War, which was a Native American uprising as well. But the origins of Bacon's Rebellion rested with the conquest of the Powhatan Indian Confederation, 1644-1646, and the Confederation's lands being distributed to the English planter class. Despite their defeat, Indians formerly associated with the Confederation continued squatting on these lands, which caused the Virginia colonists to engage in warfare against them. Okay, now the military and political situation was made more complicated by the presence of African slaves, who, along with white indentured servants, produced the colony's main crop, which was tobacco. This is before cotton becomes king. Cotton is largely going to become king after 1793, after the cotton gin is created by Eli Whitney, which greatly reduces the cost to produce cotton. Before cotton was king in the colonies, tobacco was king, but also you're going to have sugarcane that's king as well. But at this point in time, tobacco was king. Okay, tobacco is the main cash crop. Now, planters looked down upon the African slaves, indentured servants, and landless freemen, both white and black, whom they called the Giddy multitude, G-I-D-D-Y, the Giddy multitude. So you had these different groups of oppressed people. You had African slaves, you had indentured servants, you had what we would call free African Americans, you had poor whites, and you had white indentured servants. During the decades of the 1650s and 1660s, a sizable number of indentured servants, both black and white, both African and European, who had completed their required indentured labor service, clamored for old Powhatan land as well, which was under the control of Governor Berkeley, who was the governor of the Virginia colony, and his planter class associates. Nathaniel Bacon, a wealthy white Virginia planter, declared himself the leader of the colony's former indentured servants, freemen, African and white, African and European, newly arrived landless white immigrants from England, Scotland, or Ireland, and enslaved Africans, all of whom bonded together because of their common exploitation on the large tobacco estates in Virginia. All these different groups of people from different countries realized that they were all being oppressed by the same ruling class, and they took up arms to overthrow the ruling class. Now, on September 9th, 1676, Nathaniel Bacon and his followers returned to Jamestown, Virginia, and battled forces loyal to Governor Berkeley. He forced Governor Berkeley and his followers to retreat, and then Nathaniel Bacon and his 500 rebels burned down the town of Jamestown, Virginia. They burned down the town of Jamestown, Virginia. Now, I don't know if this was the inspiration for the song, the roof is on fire. We don't need no water. Let this burn. I don't know if that was the inspiration for it, but it very well could be. Okay. I don't know that. I don't know if there's a historical fact. Okay. But it could be. Who knows? All right. Now, how many people remember that song? Okay. Now, let's go back to this here. Okay. So there's a good article from history.com, official website of the History Channel, that deals with Bacon's rebellion as well. And we reference numerous sources here in the class. Toward the end of the 17th century, labor from England began to diminish. So what happens is the economy in England improves, and there's less of a desire of white people to come from England to be indentured servants here in the colonies. So you have a drying up of the labor force, of the white labor force, okay? Toward the end of the 17th century, toward the end of the 1600s, labor from England began to diminish, and the colonies were faced with two major dilemmas. The colonies were faced with two major dilemmas. The first dilemma was how to maintain control over the restless poor and the freedmen who seemed intent on the violent overthrow of the colony's leaders, because they were all being oppressed by the same ruling class, the same 1% or 10%. Okay. The second dilemma that the colonists in control, the planter class, the rulers, the second dilemma that they were dealing with was how to obtain a controllable labor force as cheaply as possible. The colonial leaders found a solution to both problems. By the 1690s, they had divided the restless poor into categories reflecting their origins, homogenizing all Europeans into a quote unquote white category and instituting a system of permanent slavery, or what we call chattel slavery. You are enslaved for perpetuity, and your children are born in slavery and their children are born in slavery. So they use the term white widespread to put all Europeans into this one category and put them on team white. Okay. And then they instituted a system of laws to institute permanent slavery for Africans, the most vulnerable, and the Africans were the most vulnerable members of the population. Okay. Now, Encyclopedia Britannica at Britannica.com, they have information on the history of the idea of race. This is where this citation comes from. The history of the idea of race. That's at Britannica.com, Encyclopedia Britannica. Okay, let's continue here. And then also there's an article from history.com, official website of the History Channel, why America's first colonial rebels burned Jamestown to the ground. Okay. That's the history.com, official website of the History Channel. Now, if we look at page 40, and these are all slides that we actually use in the class that I created. Okay. Ancient Kemet, one of the original names for Egypt, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. You never see a class like this. You probably haven't seen a class like this before. Okay. So when we look at page 40 of chapter 2 of Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr. Now, this is from the 6th edition, Lerone Bennett Jr. is laying out this history, and he talks about the fact that for all practical purposes, he says, of all the improbable aspects of this situation, he's talking about in the early 1600s, okay? Of all the improbable aspects of this situation, the oddest, O-D-D-E-S-T, the oddest to modern blacks and whites is that white people did not seem to know that they were white. It appears from surviving evidence that the first white colonists had no concept of themselves as white people, white as we think of it today, with some of them, not all of them, but some of them having a superiority complex, about 74 million that voted for Donald Trump in 2020. Okay. The legal documents identified whites as Englishmen and or Christians. Okay. So this is before about 1681 in the colony of Virginia. And the term who we would call white people were identified in legal documents as Englishmen or Christians, okay, early on in the early 1600s. The word white, with its burden of arrogance and biological pride, developed late in the century, late in the 17th century, late in the 1600s, as a direct result of slavery and the organized debasement of blacks. But that's going to be after Bacon's Rebellion of 1675 and 1676. The same point can be made from the other side of the line, talking about African people. For a long time in colonial America, there was no legal name to focus white anxiety. The first blacks or Africans were called blackamoors, Moors, Negers, Negers, and Negars, Negars. The word negro, which is a Spanish and Portuguese term meaning black or a black thing, did not come into general use in Virginia until the latter part of the century, the latter part of the 17th century, the late 1600s, after Bacon's Rebellion, when they're putting together this form, when they're formalizing white supremacy and they're instituting racism through the laws and showing a distinction in what they will call races by how they are treated. So what's the end result of this history, right? If we look at how Bacon's Rebellion planted the seeds of race-based slavery, and this is the article from history.com, official website of the History Channel. It says, in the aftermath of the rebellion, in the aftermath of Bacon's Rebellion, white planters reacted with alarm to the anger they had seen among the black Virginians who had joined Nathaniel Bacon's rebellion. Quote, the planters had not been able to control this rowdy labor force of servants and slaves, end quote, historian Ira Berlin told PBS.org, Public Broadcasting System, PBS.org, because they have information that I researched there as well on Bacon's Rebellion. This is what I presented when I spoke at the virtual conference, Midwest Decarbonization, their virtual conference. They were dealing with environmental concerns, environmental racism, things like this. This was November 2022. I blew everybody away with my presentation, right? Quote, but soon after Bacon's Rebellion, they increasingly distinguish between people of African descent and people of European descent. They enact laws which say that people of African descent are hereditary slaves. Hereditary slaves. This is chattel slavery. You're enslaved for perpetuity. Ain't something you were done. It's not something you did. You were just born the wrong race. You were born the wrong color. Now, planters feared what their white indentured servants could do. So they slowly eliminated the system of white indentured servitude, relying instead on enslaved African people to work their plantations, because there was a declining amount of people willing to come to this country to be indentured servants, because around 1680 or so, the economy in England improves. Okay, so you have these different forces that the ruling class in the colonies are trying to deal with. At the same time, they're dealing with Native American rebellions as well. All right. Now, backlash from Bacon's Rebellion is credited with helping kick off the racial distinctions that defined the colonies and the United States that followed. Now, most Americans don't know anything about Bacon's Rebellion. They think it's about bacon that you eat or something, grits and bacon and eggs or something. No, this helped shape racism in America and racist policies in America that we're still feeling the effect of to this day. Read this article from history.com, official website of the History Channel. Why America's first colonial rebels burned Jamestown, Virginia to the ground. How many people knew this? And this is what these anti-Black, anti-African American history laws are doing in these various states: Florida, Georgia, Oklahoma, where you had the Tulsa Race Massacre, June 1st, 1921. They're designed to suppress this type of history, because if you don't understand the history of how you got into a predicament or how a problem started, you're not going to be able to solve it. A people's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past, in the present, and the future to meet the needs of the community. Okay, so if you like this type of information, we have a number of people watching on Facebook and YouTube. Give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like. You can register for this online course right now. You can start watching right now. We have archive content. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it anytime. You don't have to join us in the classes live. I don't take attendance. And also, you can see me. I can't see you. So you don't have to get dressed for class and things like that. Okay. We have a live text chat, so you can ask questions in class. You can email me afterwards if you want to ask questions also. Saturdays, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., I teach ancient Kemet, one of the original names for Egypt, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. The Ma'afa is a Kiswahili term, which means the Great Disaster, our Holocaust, or the transatlantic slave trade. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. You can register for this class right now. You can use this with your children. I would say the content is PG-13. And then on Sundays, I teach Black resistance movements from the Haitian Revolution, U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, and Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968. And I was teaching this class. I first started teaching this class in 2021. Okay, I created this class as well. The second one, because I had so much information in the first class that I knew that this period from 1800 leading up to the Civil War, what causes the Civil War to take place, the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, Missouri Compromise of 1820, Mexico winning its independence from Spain, 1821, Vicente Guerrero becoming president of Mexico, second president of Mexico. He was of African descent, 1829, Texas winning its independence from Mexico, 1836, Mexican-American War, 1846-1848, Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, which ends the Mexican-American War. And as a result of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the U.S. gets the territory from Mexico that makes up California, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and Nevada. You have the Compromise of 1850, which deals with organizing the land that the U.S. gets from Mexico. And California comes into the Union in 1850 as a free state, but they do try to ban all free African Americans under their first governor, Peter Burnett, by the way. They tried to ban all free African Americans. It didn't work. But the fifth bill in the Compromise of 1850 was the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Okay, which went farther than the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793. And we know the U.S. Constitution sanctioned slavery. In Article 4, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution laid the foundation for the Fugitive Slave Act. So this is why it's important to read the U.S. Constitution. So I hear all these people talking about we want reparations, we want reparations. And if you're seeking a legal remedy to a historical problem, that would imply to me that you need to understand both law and history. Unfortunately, most of our people, especially a lot of people saying we want reparations, don't understand either one. And the foundation of law in this country is the U.S. Constitution. You need to read the U.S. Constitution. Also study the treaties as well, like the Black Freedmen Indian Treaties of 1866. And I talked about the Black Freedmen Indian Treaties in when I spoke at the conference. Okay. And what I found very interesting is that the Native American, so there's about 7 of us on the panel. It was a virtual panel. It's about, I think, 3 Native Americans, 1 person who was African American and Native American. And I could be classified as that too, because I had Cherokee on my mother's side, Cherokee and Blackfoot, because my mother's family's from Tennessee. But and then you had about 3 or 4 African Americans, right? Native Americans were talking about getting treaties enforced. African Americans were talking about getting a study done. They were talking about HR 40. And my thing is like, why the hell are we trying to focus on the study? Now, this was before California came out with their final study, which is 1,000 pages. Everybody needs to go read the executive summary and read it. And they put forth at least 110 policy recommendations to repair the damage of, even though California does not have a deep history of slavery, like say Texas, because 1850 California, between 1850 and 1860, California has maybe about 1,500 people who are in a semi-slavery status, where 1865, when Major General Gordon Granger goes into Galveston, Texas in June of 1865, Texas has 250,000 enslaved Africans. So California doesn't have a deep history of slavery like Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama, Texas, anything like that, okay? But they do have a rampant history of racism, discrimination, housing discrimination, redlining, voter suppression, things of this nature, okay? But I talked about the Black Freedmen Indian Treaties of 1866. And the reason why I discuss this is because we have a history, our ancestors, of getting benefits from these treaties. And the reason why is because the 1830 president, okay, I'm really trying to wrap this discussion up. I know it may not seem like it, but I'm really trying to wrap this discussion up. But let me just try to wrap it up with this here. So 1830, President Andrew Jackson, Donald Trump's favorite president, one white supremacist who loves another white supremacist. Andrew Jackson signs the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which pushes the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, Cherokee, and Seminole Indians off their land in southeastern United States. And they go over 1,000 miles out west into Oklahoma, or what's known as the Trail of Tears, okay? Now, these are what Europeans call the 5 civilized tribes of Native Americans, all right? All 5 of these Native American nations all own African slaves, and the Cherokee own the most, okay? And I have Cherokee in my family, so there's a history of this, right? So there's an article from the New York Times, September 8th, 2020. Black Native American and fighting for recognition in Indian country. Enslaved African people were also driven west along the Trail of Tears, the 1830s, after a historic Supreme Court ruling. Their descendants are fighting to be counted as tribal members. So about 1/3 of the people who were on the Trail of Tears were African people, okay? Slaves of the 5 civilized tribes of Native Americans. Some people wanted to call them servants. If that makes you feel better and helps you sleep at night, okay, you can call them servants. Yes, they're Africans married into the, yes, you had people who were part African American, part Native American. That's true. Yes, African people were the original people here. And when Asians come about 3000 BC or something like that, they come over here across the Bering Straits. The Africans and Asians intermix, and their offspring are called Native Americans. That's true as well. Dr. David Imhotep deals with this in his book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence, which I have here somewhere in the office. Because we reference this book in the class. All that's true, okay? Different things happen at different times, okay? So just because African people were already here, or some of us were already here, does not mean the transatlantic slave trade did not take place. And just because the transatlantic slave trade took place does not mean that African people were not already here. You have to understand a chronology of the last 50,000 years of history, okay? But that's another conversation. Let me see. Where are we here? Okay, Ron Graham's ancestors. So in this article, they talk about this man of African descent named Ron Graham. Ron Graham's ancestors are known as Creek freedmen. They were among the thousands of African Americans who were once enslaved by tribal members in the South and who migrated to Oklahoma when the Native American tribes were forced off their homelands and marched west in the 1830s. This ties into the origins of what we call Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Okay, and one of the first history lessons I got on this was Hannibal B. Johnson's book. This one here, Hannibal B. Johnson's book, Black Wall Street from Riot to Renaissance in Tulsa's historic Greenwood District. This book right here, one of the best books that you'll read dealing with the real history of Black Wall Street. This is one of the first historical books to really deal with this. And this, he had, this was like the second edition, I think. This came out in, I think it was 2001 or something like this. 1998. Okay, 1998. All right. This is one of the first books that dealt with the real history of Black Wall Street and the origins of Tulsa, Oklahoma. So Hannibal B. Johnson is one of the top scholars on this history, with Facebook friends as well. We've talked through Facebook. I need to get them on the African History Network show. All right. Now, so the 1830s. Now, Tulsa, Oklahoma was founded by Creek Indians around 1834 who got pushed off their land in southeastern United States. Tulsa comes from the Creek Indian word Tallahassee, and the Creek Native Americans, they take their African slaves into Oklahoma. Now, in treaties signed after, so one of the things we talked about on the panel discussion was how can we lift up both movements, the Native American movement and this, what's it called? It's Return to Land, or it's their movement to get back the Freedom Land movement. It's the movement for Native Americans to get their land back from the U.S. government. How can we lift up both movements and create synergies? Now, in treaties signed after the Civil War, this is why it's important to understand the Civil War. Okay, 1861, April 12, 1861, it starts in South Carolina with the attack on Fort Sumter, which was a military stronghold. It ends, well, General Robert E. Lee surrenders to Ulysses S. Grant April 9th, 1865 at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, but it does not come to an official end until August 1866, because even though General Robert E. Lee surrendered and his army was the largest Confederate army, it was not the only Confederate army. You had General Joseph E. Johnston of Tennessee. He had a Confederate army as well. You had Nathan Bedford Forrest, that Klansman, that clan. Nathan Bedford Forrest goes on to be the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan in 1867. Okay, you get into the Fort Pillow massacre led by Nathan Bedford Forrest. All this, you got about 200 African American soldiers who were executed at the Fort Pillow massacre. So this is a deep history here. Okay. Now, in treaties signed after the Civil War, 1861, 1865, they won freedom and were promised tribal citizenship and an equal stake in the Native American tribes' lands and fortunes. They're talking about African Americans, who we call Black freedmen. Black freedmen, former slaves or ex-slaves. Okay. After slavery ended, they didn't keep calling themselves slaves, which why it doesn't make sense for some African Americans today to call themselves descendants of slaves. Because after slavery ended, they stopped calling themselves slaves. And when their children were born, they didn't call their children descendants of slaves. African people took up arms. And if you understand the history of the Civil War, you had about 200,000 African American men, including Harriet Tubman, who was a woman, who fought in the Civil War, took up arms to fight for their freedom and the freedom of their children and future generations. So why would we put our ancestors back into a condition that they took up arms to fight to free themselves from? If you want to say you're descendant of former slaves, okay. Not sure why you would define yourself as that, because African people were here tens of thousands of years before slavery ended. But okay, if you want to call yourself a descendant of ex-slaves, descendant of Black freedmen, okay. But why would we identify with a condition that our ancestors took up arms to fight to free themselves from? As a historian, that doesn't make any sense to me. But okay, that's what you want to do. Now, in treaties signed after the Civil War, they won freedom. They were promised tribal citizenship and an equal stake in the tribe's lands and fortunes. But what followed were broken promises, exclusions, and painful fights over whether tens of thousands of their descendants should now be recognized as tribal members. Because our ancestors who were in these treaties got land from these treaties. This is how you get a Sarah Rector. Sarah Rector, who was parents were owned by Muskogee Creek. Okay, she becomes the richest Afro-American girl in the country because oil is discovered on her land in Oklahoma. And they get land from the Dawes Allotment Act of 1887 and the Black Freedmen Indian Treaties. Now, these treaties, what happens is about 1941, the U.S. government conspires with the 5 civilized tribes of Native Americans to redefine what a Native American is. And they said that you had to have one quarter or one quantum Native American blood. So many of our ancestors get pushed out of these treaties and their land is taken away. But these treaties are still on the books right now. Now, Dr. Claude Anderson, one of my teachers who we've had on the African History Network show years before a lot of these other people found out about them. Okay. We had Dr. Claude Anderson on years ago. He was fighting for years to get these treaties enforced for Black people. But now attorney Demario Solomon Simmons out of Oklahoma, out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, who is descendant of Muskogee Creek African Americans, of Black freedmen, he has taken up this fight. And he's an attorney. Sometimes we're on Roland Martin Unfiltered together, because some of you all have seen me on Roland Martin Unfiltered. I've been on Roland Show. It'll be 3 years, October 2023, that I've been a panelist every Friday on Roland Martin Unfiltered. And what I was saying on the panel is, while we focus on the study, we need to be focused on getting these treaties enforced. Because when you read the article from the New York Times, there's about 160,000 African Americans who would qualify for these treaties and qualify for these benefits and get land, free college tuition, free taxes, all different, whatever benefits the Native Americans are getting. Now, some of the descendants have won lawsuits seeking inclusion in the Cherokee Nation. Some gained nominal citizenship as Seminole Indians, but said they could not access tribal services. Others, like Ron Graham, have nothing. Read this full article from the New York Times. But now a landmark Supreme Court decision for tribal sovereignty has breathed new life into their fight. In July 2020, the Supreme Court recognized a huge portion of eastern Oklahoma as reservation land under the terms of an 1866 treaty. The same treaty also guaranteed that freed slaves and their descendants would, quote, have and enjoy all the rights and privileges of native citizens, end quote. So my thing is, like, while we focus on trying to get a study done that has no benefits attached to it, the first thing we should do is focus on getting these treaties enforced, because these are laws on the books right now. But if you don't understand history of law, you don't know this exists, you go out here trying to get HR 40 done. And nobody has told me how they're going to get HR 40 passed in the Senate, because once it passes the House of Representatives with 218 votes, you need 60 votes in the Senate. So if you have 51 Democrats, that means you need 9 Republicans that are going to vote for HR 40. No Republicans support reparations, not even the Black ones. Senator Tim Scott, who blocked the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act when the talks fell apart in September, I think it was September 2021. Okay. Senator Tim Scott has gone on record saying he doesn't support reparations. So he's not going to vote for it. If the Black Republican doesn't vote for reparations, how many white Republicans you think going to vote for it? Byron Donalds out of Florida, that Negro, he doesn't support reparations. Burgess Owens out of Utah, he doesn't support reparations. John James out of Michigan, he doesn't support reparations. So if Black Republicans don't support reparations, how many white Republicans you think are going to do it? This is why voting matters. This is why these people who keep voting against our own interests have to be voted out of office. We have to fire them. Elections have consequences. Okay, so to wrap this discussion up, now, To groups of their descendants, the logic was simple. If the United States still had to honor treaty promises it made to tribal nations, then tribal nations had to keep their word to the descendants of those formerly enslaved by the tribes. Quote, we're making noise, end quote, said Maryland Vann, V-A-N-N, a Cherokee citizen and president of the descendants of freedmen of the 5 civilized tribes. Maryland Vann estimated that there was a diaspora of some 160,000 descendants of those formerly enslaved by these Native American tribes. These 5. Now, there are approximately 567 Native American nations in this country. I am not saying that all Native American nations enslaved African people. That is not what I'm saying. And the history does not prove that. The history does not show that. The 5 civilized tribes, what we'll call the 5 civilized tribes, they did the bulk of that. Okay, so sometimes I get responses from Native Americans, things like that. I'm not saying all 566 tribal nations own African slaves. It's not what I'm saying at all. Okay, I'm being very specific with what I'm talking about. And you can read this information as well. Proper documentation ends all conversation. All right, now, Maryland Vann estimated some 160,000 of these of those formerly enslaved by the tribes, many of them living in Oklahoma. Now, there are groups representing descendants from each of the 5 tribes who meet to share sepia photographs of ancestors, compare genealogical records, and plan protests. Okay. Now, as they file lawsuits in federal and tribal courts, they say they are fighting for tribal benefits, including access to jobs, health care at tribal clinics and hospitals, housing, scholarship funds for their children, and the right to vote in tribal elections, but also for something more fundamental. Quote, my identity, end quote, Mr. Graham said. Now, read this article here from the Washington Post. Black, Native American, and fighting for recognition in Indian country. Black, Native American, and fighting for recognition in Indian country. This is from September 8th, 2020 from the Washington Post. The article goes on to say the freedmen were granted tribal citizenship and in some cases, quote, an equal interest in the soil and national funds, end quote, of that Native American tribe. In the treaties that Oklahoma's tribes signed with the federal government after the Civil War, in which the tribes were forced to cede huge portions of their land to the U.S. government. Okay, now we know Maxine Waters has been working with Demario Solomon Simmons, trying to get legislation pushed on this as well. And there's an article from history.com, official website of the History Channel, once again, called 9 Entrepreneurs Who Helped Build Tulsa's Black Wall Street. Okay, and you have to understand this chronology of history, the origins of Tulsa, Oklahoma. So you have all these people out here, they're trying to recreate what Tulsa did, Black Wall Street, this, Wall Street, that. Almost none of them are talking about getting these treaties enforced. And here's why this is important. Okay, now Hannibal B. Johnson is cited in this article from history.com. Okay, Hannibal B. Johnson said the relative wealth of some Black folks in Oklahoma comes in part through their connection to the tribes and their land ownership, through the connection to these Native American nations and these treaties. Okay, says Hannibal B. Johnson, historian and author of Black Wall Street 100, an American city grapples with its historical racial trauma. All right. Now, this was the book that he wrote that came out on the centennial commemoration in 2021 of the Tulsa Race Massacre that was June 1st, 1921, started June 1st, 1921. Hannibal B. Johnson went on to say, the Dawes Act of 1887 that I mentioned a few minutes ago, the Dawes Allotment Act of 1887, which redistributed 138 million acres of land. In the majority of it was supposed to go to Native Americans and Black Indians, but white people ended up getting 2/3 of that land. This is where the phrase $5 Indian comes from, because they found out that this land, white people found out this land was being given away, and it was like a census that was taken. So you had people that had to go around through Native American country and document who was there, African Americans that were there, so that land could be distributed. But they had to anglicize their name. They had to anglicize their name. So Christianize their name, take on, white names, John Smith, something like that. So white people found out about this. So they paid $5 to the registrars to have their name added to the Dawes Roll so they can get some of that land. Okay. So white people end up getting 2/3 of this land. Britannica.com has information on the Dawes, D-A-W-E-S, named after Senator Henry L. Dawes of Massachusetts. That's who this law was named after. Britannica.com has information on the Dawes Act of 1887. You can check that out. Now, the Dawes Act of 1887 authorized the government to divide tribal territories into allotments for individual Native Americans, which included black members. As word spread that Indian Territory was a safe place for African Americans to settle between 1865 and 1920, more than 50 black townships were founded in Oklahoma. All right. So a lot of the early African American landowners in Tulsa, Oklahoma, got land from the Black Freedmen Indian Treaties of 1866. And Tulsa, Oklahoma was founded by Creek Indians right around 1834, when they go into Oklahoma after being pushed off their land in Southeast United States, and they take their African slaves with them into Oklahoma. And Tulsa comes from the Creek Indian word Tallahassee. So when you study this history, then you see how we got to where we are today, and how the laws and policies of the past are shaping the conditions of the day. So it was laws and policies that put us in this predicament. It's going to be laws and policies that get us out of this predicament. All right. So visit my website, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com. How you all like this type of information? Give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like. Also, I have in digital download format and DVD format, 15 of my lectures in a bundle pack. African History Awakens the African Mind from Mental Death. This is a 15 lecture bundle pack. The digital download is $75. In DVD form, it's $100. Okay. It's right on the homepage of our website, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And also we have our PayPal Cash App information here as well. This is our Cash App account, $TheAHNShow, SHOW. These other ones are fake African History Network Cash Apps. There's about 5 I've identified. I'm trying to get them shut down. You click right here, it takes you to this is our QR code for Cash App. And when you go to it, it'll say Michael. May show my picture there as well. Here's our PayPal information, $TheAHNShow through PayPal. So you can register for the online quiz, my DVD lectures, digital downloads. They're at our website, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Also, listen to the African History Network show Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on our social media platforms. 9, 10 a.m. Superstation WFDF, the radio station I was on. They did a format change. So it's not talk radio anymore. It's fine with me. I have my own network, so it really don't make me any difference. And our shows are in audio podcast format as well. Okay. So hopefully you learned a lot from the discussion today with Dr. Chike Akua and our discussion afterwards. Support the African History Network. It takes a lot to produce these shows, do the research, pay the bills, keep the network going. We're going to get out of here. Remember, right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. And we'll talk to you next time.